Morning.
Good morning.
So, just a few housekeeping rules, please. If you could, everyone, keep your microphones muted until the Q&A section of the session, it would be much appreciated. This session is going to be recorded and it will also be uploaded to the website shortly following the actual session itself. You can ask any questions using the chat box, or obviously you can wait until the end of the session and actually ask questions virtually also. And something very important to note is that information that is shared in this session that obviously does not supersede the rules of participation. So to get us started, I'm Julia Colina and I come from the Research and Innovation Unit. And my colleague Enya is also present in this call and she is also the co-manager on this program. The R&I unit is the unit within Scienza Malta that manages national funds for research and innovation. And we have three funding portfolios: Fusion, the Thematics, and the Research Networking Scheme. Overall, the unit manages around 12 different research and development schemes across all levels of research, development, and innovation. And projects hence vary from small grants of around 4,000 up to a maximum of 500,000 this year. This program falls underneath the Fusion portfolio, which is a portfolio for national funding that drives and supports local R&I. It provides aid for projects at all technology readiness levels, so ranging from TRL1 all the way up to TRL8. And it also ranges from projects which are non-thematic to others that are a bit more specific. This year, our budgetary allocation has increased to 9 million, which also obviously means that we are able to fund a lot more projects. And underneath the unit, we manage all the types of the Fusion manages all types of research from networking all the way up to commercialization. This is a bit of a snapshot of all the funds that we offer, and today we are going to be talking about our Research Excellence Program. If you have any other queries about any other funding schemes, you can always reach out and we'll guide you to the respective executive within our unit and they can give you more information. So the call timeline for the Research Excellence Program, as you know, the call launched on the 29th of April. Today is the information session. The deadline for applications will be on the 24th of June. The grant agreement signing will be in November, and something a bit different about this program, which is different to any of the other calls that we've actually launched this year, is that the projects will actually start in February. So that means that grant awardees actually have a gap between November and February to actually start some procedural administrative side of the fund. So, for example, procurement and employment. That does not mean that you can start spending. However, you do get that 3-month leeway to start those administrative tasks. So, a bit more on the Research Excellence Program. So this program is there to provide financial support for research and development and innovation through a bottom-up approach. What this means is that it targets early stage TRL. So we have from TRL1 up till TRL4, as you can see in this pyramid. So basically any project can apply within that range up to a maximum of TRL4. Excuse me. The program is hence intended to fund projects which are at an early stage of research, but nonetheless must boast a high scientific excellence as well as national and international relevance to the smart specialization strategy. This information can be found in the application form, where all of the criteria for evaluation will be explained and also discussed a bit further through the presentation today. So over the years, we've seen a large increase in demand and application for the Research Excellence Program. If we see from 2021 up until 2024, the number of applicants and the number of awardees have also increased substantially. We've also seen a big increase in the private sector, and we do follow a funding strategy of private and public at an equal rate. I will explain this later on. And as you can see through the snapshot, there's an approximate 60% award rate at application. I'd like to say that last year, out of all the REPs, any applicant that got an 80% mark or over did actually get awarded. So we always do tell our applicants to try their best to get as high a mark as possible, as if you get a higher than 80, the chances are that you will actually be able to take your award and start your project. I'll explain this a bit more further down also. So who is actually eligible for the Research Excellence Program. So there are two routes. If we look at the option A, which is state aid, this is, refers to individual private undertakings. Again, these also obviously have to have a TRL between 1 till 4. And this includes, for example, any entity, a cooperative, a professional body, foundations, non-profits, NGOs, anything of the sort. Those all fall under the state aid option A. We also then have our option B, which is non-state aid. This is there for public entities, which includes legal public entities, as well as public research and knowledge dissemination organizations. Something important to note is that the REP is only available for sole applications. This means that you cannot have consortia or partners as part of your application. However, you can always go through the subcontracting route or the collaboration route, which I will also explain slightly later in the slides. So eligibility and co-financing. As I said, there are the two routes, right? So you have the state aid route, which means that of private applicants. So any entities that actually perform an economic activity would fall under this route, and they can be funded through the de minimis route, up to which allows a maximum of 300,000 over 3 years. So this grant is there for 100,000 this year, and you can get up to a 90% financing of eligible costs. What does this mean? This means that, so the REP is offered at 100,000, right? The 90% is your 100,000. So you can apply for the maximum 100,000 as your 90% and then add in an additional 10,000 for that to add up to your 100% in financing. If you have any questions about this, you can ask me in the chat box or at the end during the Q&A. And then there's the non-state aid route. This is funded again to public entities and public RKDOs, and this is actually financed at 100%. So there's no need for the entity to actually fork out that additional 10%. All the funding, all the grants will be financed at an 80-20 rate. What does that mean? So you'll get 80% upfront financing, and then the 20% will be given as a retention. So at the end of the project, once the financial report is given and if all your duties have been fulfilled, the 20% will be released on our end, and that way you will get the 100% funding. So let's move on to mandatory deliverables. These are the only mandatory deliverables that there are from our end for the Research Excellence Program 2025. So if anyone here is familiar with most of our schemes, you have the kickoff meeting, which has to be held at the beginning of the project. There are templates available for all of these deliverables except for the article. A 6-monthly progress meeting, which means that you will need to have a meeting with us at the 6th, the 12th, and the 18th month mark, because the projects actually have to have a duration of 18 months. You also would need to publish an article. This article is there for local media, not international media. And this also needs to be presented to Scienza Malta within 2 weeks of the publication. Do keep in mind that all of these deliverables, excluding the audited financial report, have to happen during the timeline of the project, so within the 18-month period. You have your final technical report, which has to happen at the end of the project, and the financial audited final report. That does happen 2 months after the end date of the project, so at month 20. Otherwise, all the deliverables from here onwards must actually be submitted throughout the timeline of the project between month 1 and month 18. They cannot be handed in afterwards. This is a list of a few deliverables which are not considered as deliverables. So basically, any activities related to project setup are not actually considered deliverables. They are essential to the project, but they shouldn't be listed in your deliverable list. So this includes things like personnel recruitment, procurement of equipment, ethical approval, and internal meetings. This is a non-exhaustive list. You can find more details in the rules of participation also. As I said, this year, there's actually that leeway being given between the date of signing of grant agreement and the start date of the project, where most of these activities can actually start to happen because they wouldn't actually require payment. It's very important to note that any finances have to happen between the start date and the end date. So within that 3-month period, you can perform activities, but they cannot be related to any payments. So this is a list of the eligible costs in this program. So we have personnel costs. All personnel costs are uncapped except for management costs, which are capped at 10% of project value. Whenever we're referring to project value, it's important to keep in mind that this is referring to the 100%. So if you're coming from the private sector and you're being financed at a 90%, this 10% makes reference to the 100%. So it also includes the 10% that you're also adding to your project. So personnel costs are uncapped. However, management are capped at 10%. Consumables are capped at 30%. Instruments and specialized equipments are also capped at 30%. However, between instruments and consumables, as a total, they cannot exceed 50% capping of the project value. Subcontracting is capped at 25%. It's important to note that if management costs are not included at application stage, it's automatically assumed that these are going to be taken from the subcontracting line. So if they're not going to be taken from the subcontracting line, it's very important for you to actually specify who the management is going to be taken care of in the project, and you do include it in your budget or in your application form. Travel is capped at a maximum of 4,000 euros. And then you have an additional 20% overall for other operating expenses, also known as overheads. So before I mentioned that this program is there only for sole applicants. However, you can always have collaborators or subcontractors. What's the difference between these two? So collaborators are people who are going to be included in your project, and they're going to provide you with a letter of intent. There is a section for them specifically in the application form. However, collaborators cannot be financed throughout this proposal. So they cannot actually receive funds directly through the project. Subcontractors, on the other hand, can. They don't need to provide you with a letter of intent. They do need to be included in your budget under the subcontracting line. Most likely, they will also be included in your work packages if they're going to be carrying out specific aspects of your work package. However, you are always the responsible person for if their subcontracted activity is linked to a deliverable, the PI is the person who is responsible for that activity, since this project is there for sole applicants. If it was in consortia, it would be another thing, but we're talking about sole applicants here. Again, if you have any queries about this, feel free to drop a question in the chat box, or you can ask questions at the end of the meeting. So this is a bit of a timeline of what the call procedure will look like. So if we start from number 1, that's where we are today. We have the publication of the call. Then please feel free to contact us for any one-to-one specific project consultations, after which it will be followed by a single stage submission. What this means is that once you submit to Scienza Malta with the title Application Submission Research Excellence Program 2025, you cannot amend your application in any way, shape, or form. So because of this, we do suggest step 2, where you come to us and you actually hash out your application form at a personal level. That way we can ensure that there are no mistakes and that your application does not get an admin fail, because that's the thing that we really want to prevent. We do want your applications to go through and get evaluated by our evaluators. For it to be able to do that, it can't get an admin fail, and we can help you prevent that admin fail. Step 4 would be an administrative evaluation, as I'm saying. Step 5 is the external evaluation. So we do have a board of external evaluators who are consulted for the evaluation, and they're chosen according to the scientific areas that you select. So when you're filling out your application form and there's a scientific area and the keywords, for example, those are very important for us to actually select our evaluators. So I would tell you to pay a lot of attention to when you do write those down in your application form. Following that, you'd get a notification of award subject to due diligence output in the case of, for example, private entities, and then would follow by the grant agreement signature and obviously the start date. As I mentioned, between step 7 and step 8 this year, there will be a bit of a gap, around a 3-month gap between November and February. So the evaluation criteria is split into 3 sections. You do need to get a minimum of 65% to pass. As I said before, there's also the 80% QPA, which I'll be explaining later. But the evaluation criteria itself is split into the 3 aspects that you can see on the screen. 50% is given to scientific excellence. As we said, this is the research excellence program, so it does have a hefty weighting to it. 25% respectively for impact and implementation. You can find the actual evaluation criteria itself in the application form. So the application form for scientific excellence and impact actually specifies what the evaluation criteria is. So essentially, if you answer all the questions in the application form, that is the basis upon which you're going to be evaluated. And the implementation can be found within the rules of participation. This will refer to section 6 of your application form. It has been pointed out to us that there's a mistake on the application form on the website. There's section 5, the number 5 left out. So if you follow the application form, it goes section 1, 2, 3, 4, and then section 6. It was a mistake from our end. Apologies for that. So don't think that there's a section left out. It's just the numbering was mistaken. So as I mentioned before, the selection process is even. We try to make it as even as possible between the option A and the option B. So how it works is that we create a ranking list according to the rank of the mark allocated at evaluation. And essentially we award the highest ranking from both options first. So you'd get the highest ranking project from option A and option B, and then you'd move down the list. So that way they're not actually competing against each other, and we can award the same number of option A to option B. So the same number of private to public applicants. So I've been making reference to this QPA quite a bit. What is this QPA? This is the quality proposal acknowledgement, which means that your application didn't get a sufficient mark, which means 80 or higher. And yet we might not have had enough funds to actually award you straight away. So you get this QPA label. What this does is it allows us to actually be able to award you up to 3 months after the date of notification. So let's say in the budget of 2026, we only have the capacity to fund X number of projects. Those number of projects have been notified. The rest, if they got a mark higher than 80, they get this QPA. Within a 3-month timeline, we can revise our internal budget and see how many applicants we can actually award. So as I said last year, for example, all projects that got a higher than 80, so even the ones that were awarded at first instance, and all projects that got a QPA were actually awarded, and all the projects are actually ongoing right now. So we always do suggest that you try your best, to get the highest mark that you can, because the chances are quite large that if you get a QPA, your project will actually move forward, maybe at a later date, but it will still be awarded. Obviously, this is subjective to the year and the budget that we have, but in the past, it has been the majority of the case. So this is a checklist of what the application should include. You can find this actually at the bottom of the application. So I do suggest that you really give it a thorough read through before you submit your applications. I'm not going to go through it point by point. However, you have the boxes which are solid line, which are mandatory, and then the boxes which are dotted lines, which are optional. So not necessarily everyone needs to submit them. For example, under option A, there's the financial projections in the event of a startup, or the management accounts in the event of an SME or a large enterprise. Collaboration letter of intent, for example, these are all things that are not necessarily mandatory, but they might strengthen your application. So the actual deadline for the call is on the 24th of June at 11:59 p.m. It's also mentioned in the rules of participation. However, do be careful with large attachments in the inbox, as the system automatically rejects them and it does not let you know that they were rejected. So anything more than 4 gigabytes, I believe, will not be accepted by the system. So either send it to us as a shared file system or send multiple emails if need be. It's important to send the email actually to the REP, generic email address, and then you can see myself and my colleague Enya, and we will actually give you a receipt and your project code within a few days of the application being received from our end. As I said, this is a single stage submission. So once we do receive the email with the subject as mentioned here, you cannot change any aspect of your application. So if you do have any queries, don't submit it. You can always send us an email with a draft version. We can set up meetings, we can contact each other and discuss further. But once you do submit it with the official submission email, we cannot accept any changes. So here you have my contact detail, where you can contact me for any one-to-one meetings that you'd like to organize. If I could please ask you to fill in this survey about the information session so that we can always improve on how we're giving our information, it would be much appreciated. I can open the floor now to some questions. I think we have a question in the chat. Sorry, Let me just answer the chat and then we'll get to your question. Are there any preference given to certain teams or subjects from the REP call? No, this is a non-thematic call, which means that anyone underneath any sector can apply. In the resource page on the website, there's a list of smart specialization areas, and you have to choose between those for your application. There will be no preference given to any specific area. Yes, Elena, I think you had a question. When will the awards be announced? So the grant agreements themselves will be signed in around November, which means that the awards will be announced slightly before that, either the end of September or November itself, or October, sorry. The presentation itself won't be sent out to the applicants. However, the recording will be uploaded to the website, and you can actually access the recording at any point in time over the website. Did I answer all your questions? Are there any more questions? Are there exclusion criteria for applicants who have already have other EU grant agreements? There's no exclusion criteria. However, you do have to be careful of a concept referred to as double funding. So even internally or within European funds, you obviously cannot have the same project or the same activity being funded by more than one fund. So that's the concept of double funding. What this means is basically, in simple terms, if I bought a laptop through one project, I can't claim the funds of that laptop through another project. If I'm performing certain activities in one project, they can't also be performed in a different project. Obviously, we do understand that people are specialized in always the same field, for example, so you can have multiple projects focusing on the same overall project. However, every single project will have a different scope, different activities, different agenda. So that will prevent you from falling under double funding. I'm not sure if that clarifies your question, Loredana. So Lynette asked if it can be used for PhD studies. Underneath the personnel description of eligible costs in the rules, we do specify that students can be participants in projects of the sort and they can receive stipends. However, when it comes to university, the principal investigator must be a resident academic. So a PhD student themselves can't actually be the ones to apply. Your supervisor would have to apply on your behalf for the project, and you can either be employed on the project or you can receive your stipends through the project. Does the fact that the amount being funded has increased from last year mean that there will be a lower acceptance rate? No, definitely not, Mark. We have increased the amount because we have increased the budget, so we should still be able to award the same, if not more, number of projects than we did last year. Thank you, David had already answered it in the chat. How many projects are you envisioning to award this call? Unfortunately, we don't have foresight over this. As I said, the projects this year are going to be funded through next year's budget, so 2026. So we don't actually know the amount that will be awarded, will be given to Scienza Malta for the Fusion portfolio of 2026. So we can't actually have a foresight of how many projects we can award, but it does tend to gradually increase from one year to another. So what I can say is that it should be more than it was last year. The funds will be paid out before the project starts. So you'll get an 80% upfront payment. So if you apply for the maximum grant, which is 100,000, and you're coming from the public sector, so you have 100% aid intensity, right? You'll get 80K upfront and then 20K at the end of your project once you close and submit your financial audited report, Iona. Does that confirm your question, please? So what percentage of projects have been awarded in the past? Let me just go back to that slide. Maybe you missed it as you might have joined late. So these are the number of projects that were awarded in the past. As you can see, last year alone, there was a 60% success rate. And that doesn't mean that there were projects that got a high mark and weren't awarded. That means that everyone above who got an 80 or above was awarded. The rest either got lower than 80 mark or failed the evaluation altogether. So that was Petra's question. Lynette, even if it's taught through self-employment. So self-employment is not eligible. As I mentioned in the eligibility criteria, you must be a registered entity. So that's mentioned here, and it's also specified in the rules of participation. So as I'm saying, this presentation is a very, very brief of what's mentioned in the rules. I always suggest you Control F and find what you need in the rules because it's a lot more detail and you will definitely get all your questions answered there. Can the supervisor be from a non-local university? No, they have to be local. So they can be from the private sector. That's not a problem, but they have to be local. They have to be registered according to this slide. They have to be registered either at a local NGO, whatever, university or KDO. Has to be local, though. These do not support international funding opportunities. Where can we see the previous projects awarded through the school? So they weren't actually published, so there isn't a list that you can find. However, they do as is in this project, there's the mandatory deliverable of a public media article. So you can find their project through various articles on Times of Malta, for example, or Lovin. They do tend to do a lot of dissemination for their projects. Okay. Anu, good morning. A question related to double funding. So if you've already submitted, for example, to the Cancer Research Program, you can always submit the exact same proposal to the Research Excellence Program, obviously having to tweak it because the Cancer Research Program is one program and the REP is a different program, so they have different scopes. But it can actually be the same experiments. Obviously, if you do get awarded the cancer, you would have to drop the Research Excellence Program because you'll be informed for the cancer prior to the Research Excellence Program, as obviously that closed on Monday. So you'll actually get your result before the REP. But you can always apply for both, for example, the Cancer Research Program and the Research Excellence Program simultaneously for different projects. There's nothing saying that that will eliminate you or give you any lesser of an opportunity to get the funds. Definitely not. Something actually that does support your application is whether you've taken previous funding. So any previous funding, whether it's local or international, obviously boosts your application form, and our evaluators do enjoy seeing such information being given in their application, because that means that if you're successful at other funding opportunities, your submissions and your previous experience is obviously at a certain level. I believe I should have answered everyone's questions. If there are someone that I didn't answer, please let me know. You can also unmute, it's not a problem. Okay, if the virtual silence means, I guess that I answered all the questions and everything should be sorted. As I said, let me just go back to the final slide. Please do contact myself and my colleague Enya for actual information and one-to-one meetings. As we said, we really don't want to see anyone get admin fails, and unfortunately we're seeing it at a relatively common rate. And we can really prevent this by you coming to us and hashing out your application form prior to submission. Once you do submit, it's set in stone and we can't do any changes, unfortunately. Thank you all very much. If you have any concerns, do feel free to reach out and we can help you with it. This recording will be uploaded online and you can watch it at any time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.